You know that feeling when the plane lands, the cabin lights flick on, and everyone's phones reconnect at the exact same time? That's when the world changes. Somewhere between the wheels hitting the runway and the first notification buzzing through, a narrative flips. The people who doubted go quiet. The ones who believed sit up a little straighter. And the athlete stepping off that plane, she already knows. Because this wasn't luck, this wasn't hype, and this definitely wasn't accidental. When Eala arrived in the US, amid reports of a massive partnership with Gatorade, it wasn't just another endorsement headline floating around the internet. It felt like a turning point. The kind that separates promising prospect from undeniable force. And for a very specific group of people, it felt like something else entirely. Regret. Let's slow this down for a second. For years, Eala has carried two very different conversations around her name. One conversation was about potential. Junior titles, big forehands, composure beyond her years. A teenager competing with the calm of someone 10 years older. The other conversation, that was louder, skeptical, dismissive. She's talented, but there's a ceiling. Let's see if she can really handle the tour. That word really followed her everywhere. But here's what critics often misunderstand about athletes like Eala. Development in tennis isn't linear. It's not a straight staircase. It's a maze. It's injuries, travel exhaustion, early losses, rebuilding confidence, and learning how to win ugly before you win big. While people were debating her ceiling, she was expanding her foundation. Quietly, relentlessly. And the thing about foundations, you don't see them. That's the whole point. You only notice the structure once it's tall enough to cast a shadow. And right now, that shadow is getting very, very long. Now let me take you back a little further before we talk about what this Gatorade moment actually means. Eala wasn't handed anything. She wasn't the product of a tennis family with a private coach and a facility in their backyard. She came up through the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain, and if you know anything about that program, you know they don't hand out compliments or confidence boosts. You earn everything there. Every drill, every set, every improvement. The culture is built on repetition and demand, not motivation speeches. She won the French Open girls singles title in 22. She became the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam junior singles title. That alone should have ended the conversation about ceiling, but it didn't. Because junior titles, according to the loudest critics, don't count asterisk. You've heard it. Everybody has. Wait until she's in the real draw. And then she got into real draws. She played on the WTA tour. She faced established professionals. She lost matches she was supposed to lose and won some she wasn't. That's not failure, that's process. That's exactly what growth looks like from the inside, even when it looks messy from the outside. But people want results on their timeline, not the athletes. And patience, that's in short supply. When you've already decided someone's story, here's something that got lost in the noise during those transition years. She kept showing up, not just on the court, everywhere. In press conferences, Eala has always been measured, thoughtful, never trying too hard to be likable, never performing humility. She doesn't feel. There's a quiet confidence that reads authentically rather than rehearsed. Journalists noticed it, sponsors noticed it, and more importantly, fans noticed it, because you cannot fake that kind of presence for very long before it either breaks or proves itself. Hers proved itself. The social media numbers grew. The engagement wasn't passive, it was active, passionate, and it crossed borders in ways that required no translation. A player from the Philippines competing on the global stage of professional tennis carries a weight that statistics don't fully capture. Every win resonates across a region. Every resilient comeback becomes shared motivation. Every loss, even the painful ones, becomes part of a collective narrative that people genuinely invest in. That's not just sports, that's cultural movement. Now let's talk about Gatorade. Not the product, not the commercials, because that's what Gatorade is in sports marketing. An institution. Their roster of past and present partners reads like a Hall of Fame entrance. Michael Jordan, Serena Williams, Peyton Manning, Usain Bolt, Tiger Woods, LeBron James. You don't end up on a short list alongside names like that by accident, and the people making those decisions aren't operating on gut feelings. They're operating on data, on brand alignment studies, on long-term projection models that factor in market reach, audience demographics, social influence, competitive longevity, and something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore: story. Because Gatorade has always sold story alongside electrolytes. The iconic Is It In You campaign wasn't about hydration formulas. It was about identity. It was asking every kid watching whether they had that thing inside them, that drive, that competitive DNA. It was aspirational advertising at its most effective. And now connecting that legacy to Eala, that's not random. That's a deliberate statement about who they believe she is and what they believe she'll become. When brands at this level write checks, they're essentially publishing predictions. They're saying out loud with their money, we believe this athlete's best chapter hasn't been written yet. Think about what that means. The skeptics spent years questioning whether she had enough. Gatorade looked at the same career and said she has more than enough, and we want to be attached to what comes next. That is a remarkable reversal. But the business angle runs deeper than one deal. Earlier in her career, reports suggested Eala was already thinking about equity arrangements rather than straightforward appearance fees. That's not a common posture for a young athlete still climbing the rankings. Most players at that stage take what's offered, build visibility, and renegotiate later. The equity mindset? That's something you usually see after the first major title, the first real agent negotiation, the first business manager sitting across a table explaining ownership structures. She was thinking about it earlier, and that suggests a level of financial curiosity, or the right people around her, that not everyone in that position has. Surrounding yourself with the right team when you're young doesn't get you headlines, but 5 years later, it defines your entire financial landscape. Partnerships that have been linked to her brand story from NutriAsia to NutriFactor follow a pattern. They're not random brand collisions, they reflect an athlete who is evaluating fit, alignment, and trajectory rather than just name recognition. She appears to be asking, where is this company going, and does that path run alongside mine? That's not typical, that's strategic. And then there's the apparel conversation happening in the background. Nike has always treated tennis as a global chessboard. They've cultivated relationships with top players for decades because they understand that in a sport consumed globally by affluent, brand-conscious audiences, apparel is inseparable from identity. But they've had lessons. Coco Gauff moving to New Balance was a significant moment, not just financially, symbolically. It proved that the new generation of players had leverage, that they weren't obligated to accept legacy deal structures just because a brand had history. The power had shifted, and even giants had to recalibrate. So when Eala's name starts appearing in conversations about major apparel negotiations alongside interest from both Nike and Adidas, according to various reports, it shouldn't surprise anyone. It should make sense, because the moment an athlete transitions from talent to market mover, hesitation from interested brands becomes genuinely expensive. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. Every month you wait is a month the athlete builds equity elsewhere, deepens relationships with competitors, and shifts their identity further from your brand story. Urgency isn't panic, but the smart brands feel it. Let's shift gears, because I don't want this to become purely a business breakdown. Because behind the numbers, behind the negotiations, behind the reported deals and the brand alignment conversations, there's something more important. There's a human being, and the human side of this story is what makes the business side possible. Think about what the last several years have actually required of her physically and mentally. The WTA Tour is not forgiving. The schedule alone, the travel, the time zones, the constant recalibration of your body and your game burns through players who don't have the right foundation. You play a tournament in one continent, fly across the ocean, practice in a new climate, and compete at full intensity within days. And you do that week after week, while social media exists, while every match is dissected publicly, while every double fault gets screenshot and quoted back to people who say, *C, I told you so, *, while the people who are supposed to be your supporters sometimes express their support in ways that add pressure instead of removing it. She has navigated all of that, not perfectly, nobody navigates it perfectly, but she has navigated it without fracturing, without the public meltdowns or the erosion of competitive focus that you see in athletes who haven't built internal infrastructure to match their external ambition. The composure visible in her recent matches on tour isn't manufactured. It's the result of someone who has been through the difficult middle portion of becoming and come out understanding something important. The critics never had any real power. You gave it to them when you listened. You took it back when you stopped. There's a specific subset of the doubt she's faced that deserves its own paragraph. The doubts that came from people who genuinely cared, fellow Filipinos, fans, people who weren't being malicious but whose anxiety about her potential failure expressed itself as lowered expectations, as protective skepticism, as I don't want to get hurt again by hoping too much. That kind of doubt is complicated, because you can't dismiss it the way you dismiss the performative criticism online. It comes from somewhere real. Filipino sports history has not always been kind to hope. The moments of breakthrough have been celebrated intensely precisely because they feel rare, hard-won, not to be assumed. Eala understood that weight. You can see it in how she speaks about representing the Philippines, not as a burden but as something she carries with intention rather than obligation. There's a difference between an athlete who feels trapped by national expectation and one who genuinely wants to be part of something larger than their individual statistics. She reads as the latter. And that matters to sponsors too, by the way. It isn't just demographic reach, it's the authenticity of connection. Manufactured national pride performs well for one news cycle. Authentic national pride builds decades of brand loyalty. So what does the arrival in the US for this potential Gatorade partnership actually represent when you pull all the threads together? It represents convergence. Years of preparation meeting a market that is finally paying full attention. An athlete who built the foundation quietly now standing in a spotlight bright enough to cast the doubters in stark, unflattering relief. The regret that hits haters in moments like this isn't explosive. It's not a dramatic realization in a single second. It's more like a slow dripping discomfort. You're scrolling through the announcement. You're seeing the imagery. You're watching the press coverage. And somewhere in your chest there's a small, insistent sensation of having miscalculated something important. Of having looked at evidence and drawn the wrong conclusion. Of having been loud about that conclusion. Some people will claim they always believed. They'll reconstruct their own history to fit the new narrative. Social media makes this embarrassingly easy and equally embarrassingly transparent. Others will move the goalposts because moving goalposts is a pride protection mechanism that requires no self-awareness. Endorsements don't mean anything until she wins a major, and then she'll win a major, and the goalposts will move again. That's fine. Goalpost movers aren't the audience she's performing for. Here's the question worth sitting with. What does this moment mean for the next generation? Because there's a 12-year-old somewhere right now holding a tennis racket in the Philippines, maybe in a public park, maybe on a concrete surface that's been repainted into a makeshift court, maybe watching clips on a phone screen with the brightness turned all the way up because the angle of the sun makes it hard to see otherwise. And that 12-year-old is watching this Gatorade story unfold. And the message landing, the message that no press release could ever communicate more effectively, is simply this: someone from here got there, not as an exception, not as a miracle, as a result of work and belief and strategic intelligence, and the refusal to let someone else define what was possible. That's what the real return on investment looks like from 30,000 feet. Not the dollar figure in the contract. The 12-year-old who decides to train an extra hour because she saw someone from her world make it into a world she thought was someone else's. Now imagine the official announcement moment set against the backdrop of a major event. The cameras, the press conference table, the branded bottle sitting casually in frame, not by accident. Everything in those shots is placement. The lighting calibrated, the backdrop designed, the language of the announcement crafted to maximize visibility and social sharing. That visual travels across continents in seconds. And somewhere in that image, past the branding, past the PR strategy, there's a person who endured years of doubt and came out the other side. Not bitter, not defensive, but simply positioned. Ready. That line should be the thing we take away from all of this. Because that framing shifts everything. Proving them wrong is reactive. It means your energy source is external. It means you're running towards something you can't fully control. Their opinions, their acceptance, their revised judgment. It's an exhausting way to build anything. Proving yourself right is different. It means the internal conviction came first. It means the work was always for the vision, not the validation. It means that every endorsement deal, every ranking improvement, every filled stadium and viral highlight reel is a byproduct of something that existed long before anyone was paying attention. That's not a sports narrative, that's a life philosophy. And it's one that extends well past the end of her playing career, however long and decorated that turns out to be. What comes next? The haters will pivot, as we said. The brands that hesitated will negotiate faster. The fans who quietly believed will feel that warm private satisfaction of having been right before it was obvious. The media will reframe its coverage, as it always does when an athlete crosses a threshold, quietly adjusting the vocabulary from asterisk potential asterisk to asterisk arrival asterisk. But for Eala, the next match is already scheduled. The next practice is already planned. The next chapter is already being written, not in press releases or partnership announcements, but in the early morning hours, when courts are empty and the only witnesses are the people who will never be on camera. That's where this was always being built. That's where it continues.